Mhm. Welcome. Welcome to Move to Learn, the Handspring webinar for manual practitioners and movement practitioners. Today is Wednesday, October 27, and we are thrilled to welcome Jim McCormick, licensed acupuncturist and also the certified instructor of Zero Balancing. Jim is the author of the Handspring book, Zero Balancing, Conscious Touch and Transformation. Prior to hearing from Jim and learning about zero balancing, let's take a look at the slide that explains how things work. This webinar will comprise roughly 45 minutes of discussion, presentation, and guided exploration, which is followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. Please have to hand a cord, a scarf, or a belt for one of our guided practices. The chat is on, so please do say hello and tell us where you're joining from. We welcome your questions, and Jim will answer these at the end of the hour for the last 10 minutes or so. Please use the Q&A button on your screen. We will aim to finish on the hour, but it's a possibility that we may continue for 5 minutes after the hour to answer your questions and engage in discussion. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll share a link to it in our follow-up email. The webinar is also streaming live on YouTube on the link shown on your screen. We draw your attention to the disclaimer that this discussion is for informational and illustrative purposes only and is not meant to impart medical or therapeutic advice or instruction. It's my pleasure to introduce Jim McCormick, who is a licensed acupuncturist. Jim had the good fortune to meet the Zero Balancing founder, Dr. Fritz Smith, while studying traditional Chinese acupuncture in the UK in the fall of 1972. 2 years later, he began his own Zero Balancing training, and in 1979, Jim became the first teacher of the Zero Balancing technique after its founder, Dr. Fritz Smith. Currently, Jim is serving on the faculty of the Zero Balancing Health Association in the US. He also teaches internationally. He is the co-president of Cambridge Health Associates, which is a holistic health center in Massachusetts, where he practices zero balancing and traditional acupuncture. Jim McCormick, welcome to Move to Learn.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for that introduction. Also, thank you to Handspring Publishers for one, publishing the book, and two, running this seminar series. I'm really proud to be part of it and happy to be part of it. And thank you all for joining in today. I'm excited about the day. We have a lot of things in mind. I'm going to talk about some basic principles of zero balancing and how they apply both to body work, but also to our lives outside of body work. And go through a number of experiential exercises. And then, as Elizabeth said, we'll have questions at the end. I want to start off briefly with just say I'm coming to you from Cambridge, Massachusetts, at our office that, again, Elizabeth mentioned, Cambridge Health Associates, where I have a practice of half acupuncture and half zero balancing, and often do both of them together in the same session. And next year will be 50 years of doing acupuncture and 48 years of doing zero balancing. So it's been a long, joyful career. And I think a lot of that is in the book, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I'd like to start with a short meditation that gives you a bit of an experiential feeling right at the beginning of moving energy through your bones, which is one of the key ideas in zero balancing, and we'll talk more about that later. And for a moment, just drop inside, close your eyes, pay attention to what's happening in your inner world just for a moment. What are you noticing in your inner world? Then bring your attention to where your sits bones, the bones at the bottom of your pelvis, meet the chair, meet the stool, whatever you're on. Pay attention to that boundary, that connection. We call it that interface. And feel the solidity that comes from paying attention in that way. And from there, send a line of energy down into the earth, as deep as you care to go. But just help yourself feel supported, stabilized, and the nourishment always available from Mother Earth. Coming up, see if you can find your coccyx. Do you have some awareness of the bones of your coccyx? Bring your awareness to that sensation. And if you can't really find it, just imagine it and it works just as well. We want to bring energy from the coccyx up through the sacrum, through the spine. Really want to feel the energy moving through the bones, all the way up the spine, and then through all the bones of your skull and stopping just above the top of your head. Take a moment to get in touch with your higher self. And from that place, take a moment just to appreciate yourself, just for being who you are. There's nothing you need to do. And then if we all take our energies up into the heavens where all of us meet, we can create an energetic pyramid over our time together, literally a kind of global pyramid. And in that pyramid, we're creating a clear, strong energy field that makes learning easy, makes sharing easy, and just makes our life more able to be in that pyramid. Just hanging out there for a moment, letting yourself feel the effects of just that being. And take a moment, we want you to hold yourself in the highest personal regard. At the same time, hold everyone else in the group in the highest personal regard. And feel what that feels like in your body. Going up into the heavens where we all met from before, let's send that, in that universal life force, that inspiration of heaven, down through each of the chakras, starting with the crowns, letting energy just pour into the top of your crown chakra, and then down to your third eye, enlivening each part of your energy field as you go, down to your throat, down to your heart, your solar plexus, the pelvis, and the root. So that hopefully you feel connected between heaven and earth, and yet aware of feeling grounded and centered in yourself, and as present to this moment as possible. And when you're ready, come on back. So if we could have the slide of the book cover. So we've found that starting any class or any online or real virtual or in-person class with a meditation just sets up the learning in a beautiful way where everyone gets more grounded, everyone gets more centered. The field for the whole group is better and everyone can learn more easily and share with each other more easily. So this is the cover of a book that I wrote that just got published this summer from Handspring Publishers. And I just want to say a brief word or two about it. It's not really a how-to book of zero balancing. The title is Conscious Touch and Transformation. And that's part of why it fits in with the theme of this year's series having to do with the hands and zero balancing. That has to do with how we touch. And there are a lot of principles of how we touch people that are applicable, again, both to our body work, but also to our lives that we want to share. And also about the book is not so much about the numerous physical things that zero balancing is useful for, everything from relaxation to numerous different pains and headaches and that sort of thing. It does do a lot of good work in that way. But I'm really more interested in the transformative aspects of it. How does it help us change in a deep way? And the understanding of the body-mind relationship between what's happening in our body and what's happening in our energy field and what's happening in our emotions. And someone comes in and says, I feel like I have a hard knot or a hard shell around my heart. And you start to work with them and you find out that there literally is hard tissue around their heart. So the mind-body experience is literal in a lot of cases. And working in that in a deep way with energy and structure allows people to have major transformation experiences. And it's not something that's known that much in the general public about body work, but a lot of body work can have that effect, and particularly zero balancing. So if I can have the slide of Fritz's hands. So we're working with the hands this year, and this presentation in particular. These are the hands of the founder, Fritz Smith, and it's just focusing on and highlighting how much our hands are involved in what we can learn with our hands by working with someone, but also what we can give with our hands by working with someone. We all know we could pick up a baby that's feeling kind of scared and hold it in a certain way that helps it feel secure and held and calmed. And without, you don't need training to do that. You just do it automatically. So we can do that with our hands and give any vibration to the person that we want while we're doing whatever body work we're doing. So we're talking about what are the ways we can use our hands. And I could have the picture of Fritz, please. It's nice to have just a moment of honoring the founder of Zero Balancing, now 92 years old. He and I met studying acupuncture in England in 1972, and I followed him around after class, and he would work on people. And I had my first session from him. Finally, I said, well, would you do that work on me? And I was only about 25 at the time, and it had a major effect. I think I felt really right for the first time in my life and felt like he was working on some internal gyroscope and resetting it. So I started doing as much ZB as I could after that. And if I could have the next slide, thanks very much. This is again Fritz's hands, just an example of working with the arm of a client. And then moving on to the next picture, this is just the logo of Zero Balancing. And we have the zero in Chinese medicine. Zero balancing is really a integration of Eastern ideas of energy and Shaktipat and meridians, along with Western ideas from osteopathy. And the integration of East and West really is what's created zero balancing and working with the energy and the structure. And zero in Oriental philosophy is really the nothing that is everything, the emptiness that is everything. There's a joke about the Dalai Lama getting a birthday present, and he opens it and he goes, oh, what I've always wanted, nothing. And the box is empty. And so zero really represents the Tao, represents the universe which we're living in. So if I talk about the definition of zero balancing is a holistic body-mind therapy that amplifies a person's health by simultaneously and consciously touching the energy and structure of the person. So we're going to talk about what does that mean, touching the energy and the structure. But for one moment, I want to talk about simultaneously and consciously. If I just bump into you, I'm going to be touching your energy and structure, but not very consciously. So I want to be aware of the structural part of you and aware of the energy part of you all at the same time while I'm doing it. So if we look at, this is a really nice slide, and the book title has transformation in it. And we think of the transformational possibilities of body work. And again, in this case, in particular, of zero balancing. We have come to understand that energy is consciousness. Working with energy is working with the consciousness of the person. That vibration holds information, and that energy is a basic building block of our bodies, and for that matter, basic building block of the world. So we want to talk a little bit more about what does that mean, the energy and structure, and what does it mean that energy is a basic building block? So if we go on to the physics of light, and this is just a picture of me doing a zero balancing session. The main thing to see here is just that it has to do with a person is clothed fully and lying on the table. And we can move on, I think, then to the physics of light. So if you look at this slide, I'm going to give you a 1-minute history of science of the Western world. And for thousands of years, even back to the Greeks, people were trying to understand what's the basic unit that makes up the world. If we get down to the smallest bit, what is it that makes up the world? If we have something like sugar and cocaine and salt, 3 sort of similar powdery white substances, but they have such very different properties, What is it that makes them have such different properties? And way back to the Greeks, people were talking about atoms, and mostly people thought that it was a particle, and you eventually get down to the smallest particle, the smallest bit of mass, the smallest bit of structure, and we'd understand then what made up the world. And there were experiments that showed this. I was a physics major in college, and you'd send a particle into what was called a cloud chamber. It looked like a torpedo going through the water, and it would hit something, and one would go off one way, one would go off the other way. It looked exactly like a billiard ball on a pool table, and a very convincing experiment that what we're dealing with was a solid particle. Then later on, someone did another experiment, which I won't try to describe, but it came out very clearly a wave, like dropping a pebble into a pond, and it creates ripples. And so it was very clearly the same thing. And one experiment was a solid particle, and one experiment was an energy form, a wave, a vibration, a field. So eventually people understood that what's really going on is a wavicle. This is about 100 years ago, where people started to understand that everything has both energy and structure. That light we think of as energy, but it has a structural aspect. And the table that you're sitting on, or the chair you're sitting on, we know that it's structural, but it also has an energetic aspect. So E equals mc squared from Einstein was energy equals mass. They're just different forms of each other. So everything has a structural aspect and an energetic aspect. And if I can have the sailboat, please. So here's some simple examples to really help you understand structure and energy in a little more detail. Clearly, the structure here is the boat, the hull, the sails, the masts, the rudder. So I've got a lot of structure. And of course, the sailboat's not going to work very well if the structure isn't in good shape. But also, if there's no wind, again, the sailboat's not going to sail. If you read these books from a couple hundred years ago when there was just wind power, some boats would get stuck out in the Pacific Ocean in the Sargasso Sea for 2 months with no wind, just circling around. So you need both the wind and the boat. You need the structure and the energy in order for things to work. And if you've sailed at all, sometimes you're moving, but the sail is luffing a little bit. It's kind of flapping, and it's not very efficient. And you pull in on the sheet or on the rope, all of a sudden the sail fully fills up, and the boat really sails efficiently. So if you play with the relationship of structure and energy, or wind and sail, you can affect the efficiency of the sailboat, or you can affect the efficiency of how a person is moving and how a person is living. If we could have the tennis racket. This is another similar example of the same idea. If any of you have played tennis, maybe you're not a sailor, but maybe you've played tennis. If you've ever hit the frame of the racket and the ball hits the frame, number one, it doesn't go where you want. It goes off in some crazy direction. But number two, there's this very unpleasant vibration. There's like a shock wave through your body that's from hitting just the structure alone. But when you hit it in the middle of the racket, you're hitting the sweet spot, you're hitting the structure and the energy. The ball goes straight, the ball goes out faster than it came in, and there's this amazing, beautiful feeling in your body. I don't play much tennis anymore, but I do play golf. And when I hit a really good shot, the vibration in my body is so good. It's one of the reasons to keep playing golf. So when you hit the right sweet spot, it shows up in your whole body. So if I can have the picture of the skeleton. So we say to ourselves, well, where in the body can we most strongly affect the relationship of structure and energy? That's the question for zero balancing. And our answer is in the bones, in the skeletal system. So if we move down to the next slide and we look at what's unique about bone energy, why are we talking about bones? Well, the bones have a lot of unique properties. One of them, if we can look at the cathedral, the next slide, when you work with the bones, there's a very different feeling to the receiver than there is to the practitioner. So it's very unmistakable that when you work with the bone, that I feel that's very different than working with the soft tissue. And also the client is going to feel it's very different. So if I could have the slide of the cathedral. So working with the bones tends to have a feeling a little bit like walking into a cathedral. You walk in, there's this strong, ethereal, vertical flow. The whole design of the cathedral is to take your energy up towards the heavens. And there's that ethereal feeling that can feel very wonderful. And that's what we compare to working with the bones. It has that connection to the universal life force that we were talking about during the meditation. And that universal life force tends to flow most strongly through the bones for a reason I'll talk about in a moment. If I have the slide of the apple orchard. So this is our image for what the soft tissue feels like. Still very beautiful, but very earthly, very horizontal, very soft, a wonderful feeling, but distinctly different than the images you get working on the bones. So when I touch into someone's bones, I tend to feel that more ethereal part. When I touch into their soft tissue, I tend to feel that more earthly part. So there's a distinct difference between the two. This is another example of the bones, another big picture of bones. One of the reasons that energy moves most strongly, we think this universal life force energy moves most strongly through the bones. Now we know it goes through the whole body. Every part of the body is fed in this way in our model of how the universe works, but it flows most strongly through the bones. The reason for that is there are a lot of big, dense tissues in the bones. If you look at the pelvis, if you look at the femur, if you look at the sacrum, if you look at the tibia, if you look at a lot of the bones are big structures. If anyone still has an alarm clock in their house that you actually plug in, there's a small wire in the United States that's 110 volts. But if I have an air conditioner, there's a much thicker wire that holds 220 volts. So a bigger wire, a bigger container can carry more charge. So we think that the bones carry a lot of charge because they're big, dense structures. They're the densest tissues in the body except for the teeth, and they're the deepest tissues in the body except for the spinal column. So the bones carry a deep part of who we are, and this is another group of bones that we'll talk about in a little bit. And so a few other things about the bones. One is the bones are piezoelectric, as are fascia, ligaments, tendons, all those tissues. If you compress them, put traction on them, put torsion on them, create an electric current. So as soon as you put some pressure into the bone, you're creating electric field already. In Chinese medicine, the bones were said to be controlled by the kidney meridian. And the kidney meridian's function in Chinese medicine is to store our essence. So there was an idea from 2,500 years ago that the bones in some way stored some deep part of our essence, some part of our being, some part of our identity of who we are, who we think we are, is stored in our bones. So we think that when we're working with the bones, we're working with a deep part of the person. We have a possibility of helping the person connect into a deep part of their core. And you can see here in this slide where you can get energy moving through the structure. You can get energy moving from the pelvis down through the femur, down through the acetabulum. And as part of the goal of zero balancing is to get that energy happening more smoothly, more strongly. And our view is that when we do that, when we get the energy moving through the bones more deeply, we're connecting the person to a deep part of themselves. They're more likely to come out feeling they're connected to their core. They're more likely to come out feeling that everything is just right as it should be. And we'll talk later that it often puts them into an altered state of consciousness where more change is possible. So that's one of the deeper transformative aspects of zero balancing. So the bones have these possibilities. The other thing that I'll mention about the bones is that when you work with the bones and the foundation joints, if we can go back to the tarsal bones just for a moment, the foot picture, all those small joints, all these small bones here are they have all these articulations are foundation joints, which their main function is not locomotion, their main function is transmission of energy. So if the energy is not moving freely through these bones, you literally don't feel connected to the ground. You tend to feel unstable. So we work with the bones, and the other place that we feel like a lot of the sweet spot happens is in the foundation joints, which are the tarsal bones in the foot, the sacrum, the sternum, and the cranial bones. So when we work with those bones and joints and get energy moving through, like the hip joint, our experience is that all the soft tissue around that area starts to function more normally. If I have trouble in my elbow and something's wrong and I can't move it, the bicep knows not to function, because if it fired fully as much as it's capable of, something would have to give. Either the joint would be injured or the muscle would be injured, because it's like the immovable force and the immovable object and the unstoppable force. So as soon as we free up this joint in the elbow and let that move more, then there's a feedback loop out to the muscle saying, okay, you can go back to feeling more normal now. So we want to get energy moving through the bones. We want to have that feeling sensation of energy and structure. And now if I could have the next slide, the moon. And this is a really nice example of what energy looks like when you can see the energy in a person, which is possible. One of the times for me, it looks like the shimmering of light on the sea. So we're looking, how do we get energy moving through that structure? So let's do an exercise here. I want to do something that is experiential. I'm going to need to move my computer for this to happen. I want you to be able to see my shins, and I'm going to ask you to do three things. And the first thing I'm going to ask is with your shins. The shins are a bone that's very accessible. It's very easy to feel on yourself. So take 1 or 2 or 3 fingers, and I'm going to ask you in a moment to just pay attention to the structure of your shin bone, of your tibia. What do you feel like? And I want you to free associate 3 adjectives. And you can say it out loud, or you can say it internally if you're with a group of people. But what I'm going to do is I just take my fingers, put them on both hands on the bones, and free associate. I feel something sharp, I feel something dense, and I feel something hard. So when I pay attention to the structure, for me, those are the kind of words that come up. I'll just give you a moment to do that. And again, it's just free associated. There's no right or wrong answer. Whatever you feel is right. So now I want you to go back again and feel the energy of the bones. It takes a different awareness. I put my fingers in touch with the bone, maybe a little lighter, but mostly I just, okay, now what's the energy of the bone feel like? When my words that come up, 3 adjectives are softness, expansive, and a feel. I feel like rather than a structure, I begin to feel a field of energy, but within the bones. So I'm hoping that most of you are able to feel a difference between feeling the structure of the bone and the energy of the bone. Now, zero balancing is trying to feel simultaneously and consciously the energy and the structure. I'm going to have you go back one more time and try to feel the energy and structure both simultaneously and see what effect that has on you. What do you notice in your body when you feel both at the same time? So if I put my hands on for myself and feel, okay, I got both, and my mind starts to shut off. I start to go into my right brain. I want to have an experience in my whole body rather than just in my shin bones. And the experiences of the field kind of flowing and kind of opening and feeling very pleasant. So there's a different experience when you're touching both the energy and structure of the bone than when you're just touching the energy or when you're just touching the structure. So hopefully that made some sense, and hopefully that a number of you had a different experience of feeling both together rather than a feeling either one. But that's what we're looking for in zero balancing. When we feel the energy and structure of a person, we can take them into a deeper place. I can have the slide of the donkeys. We call this donkey touch because when we touch the energy and structure of a person, this is a cute little picture of donkeys, but we pick donkeys for certain reasons. But when you touch the energy and structure of a person, there are 2 things that happen. One, it tends to build trust. People immediately feel like you're deeply connected to who they are. There was a person, I put my hands on her shins and I felt like her energy kind of coming and going and coming and going. And I knew her. So I said, it feels like you have a skittish energy field. And she brought to mind what she'd felt her whole life, that she felt like she was a prairie dog who would pop up, look around, and then jump back in her hole because she was kind of scared. So that felt, by connecting the energy and structure, I connected into a deep part of the person before we'd done any other body work, just right from the first touch. So you're building a strong connection with the person. It tends to build trust, and it tends to put them into their instinctual self. That's why we use the donkey. It could really be any animal, but the animal is our instinctual self where we just respond, not from our thinking brain. That would be the rider. So there's the donkey and the rider. We want to get the person out of their thinking brain into their instinctual self, into their right brain, where they can have more of an experience and where they can have a more possibility of change. So the donkey is our kind of totem animal in ZB, and we use it to, when we say we're touching the energy and structure, we're talking the donkey of the person. So if I could have the slide for the blue line. This is another, we're going to do another experiential exercise with this slide, and I hope that you have, I'll give you a moment to find some sort of cord or a belt or a scarf or something. It can even be the cord of your iPhone or something that you can have a slack in and then you can take the slack out of. This diagram gives us a sense of, in ZB, of how we want to reach the person, how we connect with the person. And then we're going to generalize from that to larger things in our life. So if you start out with slack like this, notice that now if I move my right hand, it doesn't affect the other hand at all. I mean, a little, if I keep the slack out, I do something on one side, there's very little effect on the other side. So here I'm holding the structure. I'm very aware of the cord, but I don't have any connection with my other hand. So that's that sort of slack on the left side of the slide. There's a vertical line, and that vertical line represents the place as you start to take the slack out. All of a sudden, for me right there, all of a sudden I start to feel the connection between my two hands. Now my two hands are connected. Now I have both structure and energy. I've got the structure of the cord still, but I've got an energetic connection between my two hands. Now here we're doing it just with yourself, but normally it would be with a client, and you would feel the energetic connection between you and the client when you take out some slack with a bit of traction. So this is just the beginning. We're just barely connected, but now if I move my right hand, I feel it in my left hand more. So this blue line is like the very beginning of connection. Next, there are some squiggly lines, and then there's a box. So if I put more traction, that's the squiggly lines, and all of a sudden I'm into a deeper experience. I've still got structure and energy, but now I start to feel something in my whole body. So as I add more traction, I add more structure and more energy, something happens in my whole system. And then that's that box. There's a lot of different places you can be that are good touches in zero balancing. And now do one more, those giant squiggles on the right. If I pull too much, all of a sudden I've pulled my other hand out of its comfort zone. It doesn't feel good anymore. I start to resist. So this is a model of how do we connect with people in body work, but also how do we connect with people, period. Where I get that blue line where, okay, now I'm just connecting with this person. We're having a conversation. It's not a very deep conversation yet, but I can then have a deeper conversation because I've got the basis of connection. I've got the beginning of connection that's solid, and then we can move into a deeper connection from there. So we use that image of the blue line a lot in zero balancing to talk about how do we connect with our client and how do we feel the structure and the energy. So again, we're starting with just structure, and then you reach a place where there's, oh, structure and energy. And then as you add more energy and structure into it, you have a different experience. There's one other set of things that I want to get to, and one other experiential exercise, or a set of experiential exercises I'd like to do. One of the principles we use in zero balancing is how do we touch the body with energy? There's several different ways that you can touch energy and structure. And three of them have some difficulty. And then we have interface touch is what we use in zero balancing. So down at the next slide is just channeling. So one way of working with energy that's used by a lot of psychics or used by people in Reiki, you're bringing energy from somewhere else. The universal life force is coming through you and then out to the person. And that can be a very good way of working. Someone who's good at that can do wonderful work that way. The question is, how clear is the channel? I often have trouble trusting a psychic. It's like, is the information they're bringing really clear, or is it their own ideas? And it's a little hard for me to trust that the channel is completely clear. But you definitely can work that way, and a lot of people do good work that way, but we don't do that in zero balancing. But if you want to experience that right now, you can imagine universal life force coming through the top of your head, out through your right arm, and then just sending it from your right hand to your left hand. So you're not using your energy, you're letting energy come through the heavens, through your hand, and just to your other hand, and you can feel the effect on the other side. And then if I could have blending, blending is more commonly used, and blending touch can be very well done. I know the Upledger people in Florida with cranial sacral work teach their students to blend, to let their energy field blend with the energy field of the client so they can read what's happening in the client. They can read the inner physician of the client, what they call the inner physician. Blending can be done beautifully. If we all sang as a choir, it would be much better than if I just sang by myself. You'll have to trust me on that one. But there's also problems with blending. A codependent relationship is an example of blending, where one person is drinking, the other person is enabling, but nobody's taking care of that area in the middle, like you can see in the diagram. No one's paying attention to that. And so if people have a sort of default way of operating energetically, and some of us automatically tend to blend without thinking about it. And again, sometimes that's wonderful, but if you're unconsciously blending, you can often pick up things from your clients that you don't really want to pick up, or sometimes you can be too much in their space. They feel invaded because you don't have a clear boundary. So the blending doesn't have a clear boundary. It leads sometimes to some confusion and sometimes leading to tiredness at the end of a day of working. So we can do an exercise to feel blending. It's easier when you're live with someone, but if you take your two arms and just put them like this, it doesn't take long, and I can't tell which arm is which. If I feel something, which arm is it coming from? It feels like I just have one arm rather than two. And so there again, my arms, the sensation from my arms have blended into one experience. And that's what can happen in blending. Your experience and the client's experience can blend. And sometimes that's wonderful, but there's times where it doesn't work very well and it can get you into difficulty. If we have the streaming slide, another way of working with energy is streaming. I can send my energy to the client if I want to. If someone doesn't have enough energy, I can send them my energy if I want to. Or if they don't feel loved, I can send them my love. The difficulty with that is eventually, if I keep doing that, I can get depleted very easily. The archetype of streaming is a mother and child, and the mother is giving and giving and giving, and mostly that's normal and wonderful, but sometimes the mother gives too much and the child gets smothered. So there's a time where streaming can be overdone and can be harmful. Or there's a time if I'm using my own energy to get someone to feel something, I can get depleted. So there's a danger to me, not so much to them. So if I want someone to feel loved, I want to ignite the love within them, not send them my love. If I want someone to have more energy, I want to ignite their energy field, not send them my energy. So the way we do that in zero balancing is with interface touch. And by interface touch, we mean paying attention to where my hand meets their body. So if I just put my arm here and my fingertips are what I'm using to touch the person and touch myself, I want to put my awareness right on my fingertips and just pay attention to where my fingertips meet my arm. That's interface. That's what we mean by interface. We're keeping our attention where my hand meets their body, or in this case, where my hand meets my body. So feel the difference for a moment between, again, going back to that blending, where you can kind of feel a little bit confused about who's who or what's what. And then go to this where you have interface and just your hands are right at the boundary. It makes a very clear boundary. When I'm doing this with the client, it means that I know where I stop and start, and they know where they stop and start. We're two independent beings that are meeting, but we're not blending, we're not streaming, we're really meeting at interface. So we think this is the best way to work. It's a really important principle in zero balancing. And it has very many corollaries outside of body work. I can be an interface with reality. How am I accepting being present to whatever's happening in the moment, being present in the moment? I can be an interface with the person even if I'm not touching them. I can have a non-physical interface if I'm calling my wife, I was supposed to call her at 6 o'clock, and I'm out in Colorado, and 6 o'clock comes and I'm really kind of busy. I don't really want to call her, but I call her up. I say, hello. It's like, there's not much energy in the call. We're not really at interface. As opposed to another time when I call her up and we're both really present, happy to hear from each other, really wanting to know what happened with each other, and totally present. So that's what we mean by being at interface. And again, whether that interface is with a physical interface or a non-physical interface, but the whole idea of getting to interface first before you have a major discussion with someone. So you're really meeting and connecting at the blue line and beyond. And then you're in a position where you can really have a deeper discussion that both people are really open to. So one of the other basic principles and hallmarks of zero balancing is that I mentioned earlier, that when you're touching energy and structure in the bone, you can easily put the person into an altered state of consciousness. So we have the next slide, please. And an altered state of consciousness is just any state that's outside of our normal waking consciousness. And what this means is that the person has dropped inside. If we're doing a zero balancing session and we do some work on the bones and the energy of the bones, and they go into an altered state, they're really very quiet on the outside and a lot of movement happening on the inside. But when you're in an altered state, your awareness is different. You're more in your right brain. It's more of a time of unity. There's sort of timelessness. Time sort of stops, and a lot more change is possible. You're less identified with your illness. You're less identified with your belief systems, and you're more open to change. And you can put a person into a deep meditative state like this picture in a few minutes with zero balancing, more than you can get to in 6 months of meditating. So you can really drop a person into a deep altered state, and that can have a big effect on their beingness and their ability to shift. Now, it's part of what makes zero balancing a transformative therapy, and part of what allows transformational sessions to happen. And if I could have the next slide, please. So what are some of the benefits of zero balancing? We're coming up to a place I want to sort of finish in the next 5 minutes, so we have time left for the questions and answers. I always start off with zero balancing. It just feels really good. I mean, that's not surprising. Most body work feels really good, but zero balancing feels really good. It heightens the well-being and your general wellness. It reduces stress, tension, and anxiety. If I can have the next slide for a moment. We did some research with a group down in Austin, Texas, where we had people broke up into two groups. Either they would lie on the table for 30 minutes and then get a zero balancing for 30 minutes, or they would get the zero balancing first and then lie on the table for 30 minutes. All of the clients and the practitioners were hooked up to 6 different electrical readings: galvanic skin response, heart rate variability, body temperature, movement. So they both had sensors on each hand. And then we had them also do a questionnaire before and after. So after one zero balancing session, the average reduction in stress, tension, and anxiety down at the bottom there was 51%. So that was what was really interesting, was that showed up both in the electrical sensors, which kind of measure tension. Those measurements of tension went down 51%, and it almost exactly matched the client's own description of themselves and the before and after, how much less tense and less stressful they were at the end of the session. By their own readings also went down 51%. And then we compared that to the people who were just lying on the table, and their stress, tension, and anxiety went down 12%. So we're beginning to do more research to try and understand, well, what makes zero balancing work? What does it do in the body, and how does it work? And that's some of the findings that we found so far. If I can go back one slide, Hillary, to the benefits. So it reduces stress, tension, and anxiety. And then the bottom two, well, reduces discomfort and pain. There's a lot of pain things. Zero balancing helps a huge number of pain-related complaints. But again, my book is more about the next one, the enhances personal growth and transformation. What are the transformational possibilities? How can we help people get to their best selves? How can we help people have their lived experience, their being experience, less than their doing experience? And how much that increases their sense of connection, their sense of peace, their sense of harmony, their richness in their lives. How much it increases their ability to stay connected to the present moment, which is one of the goals of all spiritual traditions. So then if we can go back to the research, and then one other thing I'll say about the research, we also found that we had people hooked up another time reading EEGs while they were having ZB, and both the practitioner and the client were hooked up, and they found a couple interesting things. One was that you could recognize when the client was in an altered state because the EEG had a certain signature to it. And also, if you ask the person after the session to remember what it was like, their EEGs were exactly the same with the memory as they were with the actual experience. It's really interesting when you start to remember something that was really good, your brain waves get very similar to when it was actually happening. And then if I can have the next slide. So the intention of zero balancing is we want to touch people on a level that they can't get to by themselves. There are places in the bone that you literally cannot reach. You don't have voluntary muscles that allow you to get there. And so we want to get below their level of conditioning, get below their common experience, their usual experience, and deeper into their core self. And so we have feeling stillness deep in your bones is one of our sort of phrases that we use to describe zero balancing, and that you just feel very still, you feel very meditative, and you feel very right. I'm going to do just a bit more here, and then we'll break the next slide, please. Oh, and then go on more after this. And so this is an example of a client and a practitioner. The client is in the blue at the top of the graph. Back to the graph, two more down. Yeah, right there. This is good, thanks. And the client and the practitioner is red at the bottom. They each have centers on both hands, so there's 2 readings for each. And the amount of tension is the higher up you go on the chart, the more tension. So the client was clearly feeling a lot more tension than the practitioner at the beginning. The red line is where the session started. And very soon after the session, the practitioner rises up to meet the client. So that's part of working at interface, working at the blue line, where we're really strongly connected to the client. And then their experiences stay together the rest of the session. They stay very closely connected, very closely synchronized, and gradually they both get quieter, 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 quieter as the session goes along. So it's a really nice graphic representation of what happens in any body work, but in this case, it happened with zero balancing and our strong connection with the person. So we'll just mention a few resources as a part of the closing here. There are lots of ways to get more information about zero balancing. There's an international journal. This will be available to you in the video of this. There's a Zero Balancing Association in the UK, which is a big association. There's a big association in the US. And the Zero Balancing Touch Foundation at the bottom is a nonprofit international foundation to hold middle C of zero balancing. And so that's a lot of information. And I hope you're able to listen to all that. I'm happy to take questions now and have some interaction and discussion in whatever way you would like.
Jim, thank you for that thorough, such clear information that's beneficial immediately to manual practitioners and movement practitioners as well. Regarding the efficacy of zero balancing for dealing with pain, would you speak more about that and perhaps explain your understanding of the mechanisms of how zero balancing can be so effective for reducing the pain sensation?
Well, there's a lot of different kinds of pain, and certainly some kinds of pain that are more easily accessible from zero balancing than others. But we really look at pain, the kinds of pain that zero balancing is helpful for will result in some strong tension, energetic tension held within the bone. There are a lot of problems with shoulder joints that are actually freed up by working on the ribs and the bones back here. And if a person has a certain finding, a restriction in their motion in this range right here, and they can't move very well there, and you work on the ribs, and without ever touching the shoulder, the pain goes away because we're freeing up the ribs. That all the soft tissue that surrounds the ribs starts to get better. Then the scapula can move and the shoulder can move. So I would say more than half of shoulder pain as one example, gets better without ever touching the shoulder by working on the energetic holding patterns in the rib cage for the person. That's one example.
Thank you. Allison Marsh in Las Vegas, Nevada, has a question. She says, Jim, what can you tell us about the energy of pregnant women and postpartum women within 6 months post-birth, and how they perceive energy from body workers? Perhaps we could narrow this to your experience working with pre and postnatal clients within
Yeah,
zero.
one strong thing to say there is we're very careful about working with women who are pregnant or postpartum. And so that you have to be a very experienced zero balancer. We have people who are just learning zero balance, and we suggest that they not work with pregnant women. There is, a danger of miscarriage, that sort of thing. So you need to have more experience to work with a pregnant woman. And there are certain, because their ligaments are already loose, it's possible if you do too much traction or that sort of thing, you can very easily give them more pain rather than less. But if you have a lot of experience, I've worked with a lot of pregnant women, and it's been very helpful, both in just general well-being, in energy, in reducing nausea, and having a more successful birth. And similarly, postpartum, you don't have to worry about miscarriage, but there's still a lot of complications. So we really want people in that situation, zero balancers, to have more than the usual amount of experience, but it can be very helpful. And this is one of the strong body-mind places where working with the body for that woman also is very likely to help her mental state, help the anxiety, both help her energy, but also help if there is something like anxiety or depression or what happens. The zero balancing can be very helpful in the mind-body aspect of all that.
Thank you. Paula has had a request regarding the slide for resources. Paula, here is that slide again, so you could take a screenshot of this zero balancing resources slide. And Jim, while this slide is up, I'll just go forward with another question regarding the recommendation for duration and frequency of zero balancing sessions. What is suggested for the interested client in order to get the most from their experiences?
That's a great question, and there are a lot of different answers to that depending on the situation of the client. A lot of people can come in without having a particular complaint, and they just want to feel good and feel better and get more. Someone might come in and their main complaint is, I feel disconnected from myself. They don't have any physical problems, but I don't feel connected to myself. I saw someone like that this morning. And zero balancing for that person, I might see them once a week for a month and then once a month for a while. And it doesn't take that many sessions for them to have a strong effect. Someone that's coming in with significant serious back pain, I might need to see that person twice a week for a couple of weeks, and then once a week, and then every other week, and then once a month. But there are times where if I teach at a place once a year, sometimes I'll do a session and see a person this year and then see them next year. And a lot of that work has still held. So there's a big variation of what's the right thing for a given person. But once people get pretty balanced, then we suggest they come once a month and just keep going, because over time they gradually feel better rather than gradually feeling worse. So it's very preventive. Not only does it feel good, but it's also very preventive in terms of a lot of discomfort, catching issues while there's still an energetic disturbance before they become a physical disturbance.
Thank you. And regarding the course of training for someone who's interested in becoming a zero balance practitioner, what are the requirements to enter the training, and how long is the training? And from your perspective, how long could you say it would take to become clinically proficient?
The zero balancing training is mostly open only to other healthcare professionals. Sometimes we let in people who are not healthcare professionals, but there are lots of things that we expect people to already know, like their anatomy and that sort of thing, or how to work with clients. We don't try to teach all of that. The beginning class is 4 days, 25 hours, and people who are already experienced practitioners can learn enough in those 4 days that they can begin to help people with their zero balancing. That teaches them a sort of very basic protocol. Then the next class, Zero Balancing 2, is another 25 hours, which gives them the full protocol. So after 50 hours, you have a full protocol that you can use right away and really start helping people. If you really want to get good at zero balancing and get certified in zero balancing, then you have to take a minimum of 4 classes. And most people that do that take way more than that. I still take CB classes as well as teach a lot of them. So people keep learning for a long time and you can just get more and more skill. But the basic level of skill to get certified in zero balancing, the minimum is 100 hours. And I would say it takes, within you, again, if you're a good bodywork practitioner already, that you can start to, after the first class, you can start helping people. If you're really new to it and haven't had much experience, it's going to take you longer. But even then, within a year, certainly you can really make significant progress in your work with people.
Thank you. And would you speak also about the ongoing research? You mentioned research going on at the training center in Austin, Texas. What's the state of research in the zero balancing community worldwide?
The last chapter in my book has a chapter on research and kind of covers all the current research in zero balancing. And so the work we did down with them was very inspirational, actually. And they were trying to, from their point of view, they were new to what we were doing. And they were trying to see, could they find a way to measure energy changes in the body? Could they find a way to say, oh, yes, I can tell when this person's in an altered state by the readings on my sensors, and compare that to when the practitioner would say, oh, this is when I think they're in an altered state, and how does that match what the sensors are saying? So they were really looking at, could we find a way to verify the claims that we're making? And from our point of view, the things that we see all the time in sessions, things we know happen. We know people go into altered states. We know people have deep experiences. And they were looking, could they find a way to measure that? And their conclusion was that they could measure it. They could measure it by the sensors on the wrists, the 6 things we talked about, but they could also measure it by the EEG changes in the person. So there's a ton more we could do in that way. Those have both been kind of pilot studies. And recently, we just did a research program where 4 practitioners gave 4 clients 4 sessions each, and then had them do a video and answer questionnaires about their experience, and then extrapolate out from them. We have one of our zero balancing teachers to be is also a professor of research at Eastern Illinois University. And she led this program in how to do qualitative and quantitative research, and found one of the biggest things in zero balancing was people feeling more connected to themselves and more connected to their community around them as part of their zero balancing experience, in addition to feeling less pain, less tension, more relaxed, what have you. But she felt, their finding was that the zero balancing helped people on what they call the 6 dimensions of wellness: mind, body, spirit, community. I forget what the last 2 are. But there's an all different levels of looking at health. So those are ongoing. People are now starting to do more research. There's a woman doing research who's a PT who works with vestibular dizziness, and she's doing a research project now. How does zero balancing affect that symptom? So some of the research is directed to what's the underlying mechanisms of zero balancing, and some is starting to look at specific problems and how is it related to those problems. I'd love to have a study done on osteoporosis and zero balancing. Working with the bones should help people's osteoporosis. It's never been proven, but I'd be surprised if it doesn't, because I can feel a bone and feel it doesn't have enough density, put some traction and fulcrums through it and feel that it, go back and feel it, and it changed. Its quality gets better. So how that translates into helping osteoporosis. I'm not sure, but that's a study I would love to do.
Indeed. Thank you. There are a couple of comments in the chat regarding what you were just describing. Somebody says, thank you. Zero balancing changed my life completely after 3 sessions. It's a year later now, and I'm wanting to learn. So this is the first.
Thank you to whoever said that.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And then Vanessa Reed says, thanks, Jim. I'm close to finishing my certification and look forward to meeting you sometime.
Fantastic. I'd love to meet you. Where is Vanessa? She's in Texas, is it?
Not sure where Vanessa is. Vanessa, you could type in the chat. In Connecticut.
Connecticut. Great. Not that far away.
Neighboring state. Yes, right. And then Gabby Diskin is interested in knowing if there are practitioners in the Bay Area.
There are several. The two that I'm most familiar with is Linda Wobaskaya, who's in, I think, is it Petaluma is where she lives, but where's her office, Elizabeth?
In Mill Valley. We're
Mill
neighbors.
Valley. Yes, and Karen Senfner is in the San Francisco area, close by also. So you can go to zerobalancing.com and find practitioners anywhere in the country, but those two are really good, longtime practitioners and teachers of zero balancing.
Yes. You mentioned during the slides of the cathedral and your slides of the apple orchard, but there are, and with regard to the work on the bones, there is a measurable, detectable piezoelectric current through the tissues. And then you spoke about the different types of touch, including interface touch. Would you connect now in discussion the piezoelectric current and the interface touch? What's the relationship of the two of those?
The bones are piezoelectric, period, whether I'm touching them or whether I'm not. But I can amplify that by how I touch the bones, by putting traction, rotation, what have you. That would be true whether I was actually at interface or not. I don't have to even know about interface. I could go and put traction on the bones and it will create this electric current. Now, a side note here is electric is not the same as chi. It's one form of energy, but it's not the bioenergy that we think of as chi that's animating everything. I lost my train of thought there for a moment. Tell me the question again.
Well, it could be.
Interface, right. So if I don't have to be at interface to have that effect happening in the bones. But if I am at interface, then it can have a deeper effect on the person. One of the things I forgot to mention in talking about the bones is that the bones transmit energy, whereas soft tissue tends to absorb energy. If you're a drummer and you hit the cymbals and you want it to stop, you just grab it with your soft tissue of your fingers and boom, it stops the vibration. The soft tissue tends to absorb vibration. Bones tend to transmit vibration. So if I do something in one bone, it tends to transmit through the whole skeleton. It's one of the things that makes zero balancing a whole body experience. Even if I'm working on the bones in the foot, it affects the whole being. It affects the energy in the whole being. So if I can do that at interface, I'm just deepening the experience for the person. It's allowing it to have a more powerful effect than if I don't have an interface. It allows me to be in communication with the person. So rather than just doing something to the person, I'm almost part of the experience. We're doing it more together. There's a sense of being with the person. Does that make any sense?
It makes a great deal of sense. I'm just making a note to myself to listen to the YouTube recording of this in order to take in the significance of your wisdom.
Right. Well, thank you.
Yes. Now we are speaking of your wisdom and the fact that you have a client shortly in your center. How about let's give you an opportunity to make summary comments, And then we'll take a look at the slide that Handspring has created for the discount code for ordering your book.
Well, first of all, thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you, Hillary, Kirsty, Mary, all the Handspring Publishing people for this opportunity. I'm glad to do it. It's been a pleasure to do, actually. And I would say about the book is not intended just for professionals. It's really, the principles are in there in a way that the general public can get a lot out of it. I'm hoping that, one, it will help Zero Balance and get somewhat more well-known. We've managed to stay very much under the radar for many years, but we want to get it more well-known, but also that people outside of the bodywork profession could start to see the benefits of using these principles in their own lives, not only by getting zero balancing, but by applying the principles in other ways to help their lives go better. So thank you all for coming. It's been a pleasure, and I hope I run into Vanessa and some of the rest of you down the road.
Thank you very much, Jim. Let's take a look at the slide now for how we can order your book. So you'll note that Handspring is offering a 20% off, and the code on your screen, capital M, capital T, capital L, 2120, which is available for checkout at the Handspring Publishing website. And we'll draw your attention that our next event will be Wednesday, November 17th, in which Joanne Lutz, who's the author of Trauma Healing in the Yoga Zone, will be the featured author. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you next time and to staying in touch with Handspring Publishing. Thank you for being a part of Move to Learn.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Thank you, everyone. See you all down the road. Thanks so much.